The roar of the high-pressure jets and the rhythmic thumping of the rollers were the first to go silent. In that sudden hush, my heart seemed to stop, just a beat, then chaos erupted outside the thick, soap-smeared windows of the car wash. Screams cut through the unusual quiet, a sharp contrast to the mundane drone of the wash cycles I had heard seconds before. I pushed through the plastic flaps into the bright light of the afternoon, my hands still dripping with soapy water. The sight that greeted me froze me in my tracks. A woman, her clothes tattered, lunged at a passing driver who had stepped out to assess his suddenly powerless car. Her teeth sank into his arm, tearing through fabric and flesh with equal ease. The man's scream was a raw, primal thing that echoed off the concrete buildings, marking the onset of hell on earth. Panic clawed at my chest. Jinny! I needed to get to Jinny. Dragging my gaze from the horror unfolding in front of me, I turned back to the car wash. My coworker, Sam, stumbled out, his face pale as the suds that stained his apron. Frank, what the hell is going on? His voice was barely a whisper, his usual boisterous tone gone. I don't know, but we can't stay here. I grabbed a metal pipe that we used for unclogging the wash drains. We need to get out of the city. It's not safe. Sam nodded, looking back at the scene with wide, fearful eyes. My sister, she's at the hospital downtown. I gotta check on her. I have to get my daughter at the daycare. My voice broke with the weight of my fear. She's waiting for me. We'll stick together then, Sam decided, his decision cementing our temporary alliance in the face of uncertainty. We moved quickly, dodging between abandoned cars and watching in horror as more of those things appeared. People, who were not people anymore, their eyes hollow, their movements jerky as they turned their newly insatiable hunger towards anything that moved. As we neared the corner of the street, a car barreled towards us, the driver's face a mask of terror. He screeched to a halt just a few feet away, flinging the door open. Get in! He yelled, glancing back at the horde that had started to form. Sam and I didn't hesitate, jumping into the backseat. The car jerked forward, the tires squealing as the driver navigated the chaos. Name's Mike, he shouted over the roar of the engine. I'm getting out of the city. Anywhere but here. Take us to 7th Street, the Little Stars daycare. I shouted back, the grip on my makeshift weapon tightening. The need to see Jinny, to hold her safe against me, fueled my resolve. As we sped away from the car wash, the rearview mirror framed the apocalypse behind us, a city descending into madness. But my thoughts were only on Jinny, praying she was safe, waiting for me to arrive. And I would, no matter what it took. The city was tearing itself apart, the streets a tableau of horror and chaos. Mike's car was a bubble of relative safety as it weaved through the urban madness. Buildings burned in the distance, casting an eerie light that flickered over the faces of the undead who roamed aimlessly until spurred into vicious action by any sign of life. Just how widespread is this? I asked, my voice tense as I peered out of the tinted windows. Nationwide, maybe farther. The radio went out not long before I picked you guys up, but it's bad everywhere, Mike replied, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. Sam was quiet, his eyes flicking constantly to the rearview mirror. When a shadow loomed too close, his breath hitched, a soft sound of fear that he quickly smothered with a cough. We turned down 7th Street, and my heart sank. The daycare was just up the block, but between us and it stretched a crowd of those creatures. Stop the car, I said sharply. Mike hesitated, then obeyed, pulling to a stop a safe distance away. What's the plan? He asked, his voice low. I didn't answer right away, pulling the metal pipe closer. I'm going in. I have to get my daughter. Sam looked at me, then at the horde. I'll help, he said, his voice more determined than I felt. Exiting the car was like stepping into a nightmare. The stench of decay hit me first, a sour smell that made my stomach churn. We moved carefully, avoiding any sudden movements that might draw attention. As we approached the daycare, a figure detached itself from the shadow of an alley, a woman, or what was left of her. Her approach was halting, desperate. In her eyes, A glimmer of humanity flickered momentarily before the hunger took over. "I can't leave her like this," Sam whispered, stepping forward with a pained look on his face. "Sam, we don't have time," I began, but he was already moving, his actions gentle as he led her away, whispering apologies. A moment later, there was a soft thud, and then Sam returned, his eyes wet but his jaw set. We reached the daycare's front door, finding it ajar. Inside, the chaos of the outside world was echoed by overturned chairs and scattered toys, signs of a hurried evacuation. The silence was oppressive, the kind that screamed danger at every turn. "Jinny!" I called softly, my voice trembling with both fear and hope. No answer came, but somewhere inside, something moved. Sam and I exchanged a glance, a wordless agreement, and began our search, moving deeper into the building. The front door creaked ominously as we pushed it open, the sound absurdly loud in the oppressive silence that enveloped the Little Stars daycare. The cheerful murals on the walls, depicting sunny skies and smiling animals, stood in stark contrast to the disarray within. Toys were scattered across the floor, a small tricycle lay on its side, one wheel still slowly spinning. "Jinny!" I called again, my voice barely above a whisper, terrified of attracting unwanted attention. The only response was the soft echo of my own voice bouncing off the empty walls. Sam and I split up, he took the kitchen and the bathrooms, while I headed towards the nap room. Each step felt like wading through a nightmare. My hand tightened around the pipe, ready for anything, or so I thought. The nap room was chaos. Blankets and pillows were strewn about, little cots overturned. A stuffed bear lay on the floor, its eyes seeming to stare up at me in accusation. "I'm coming, Jinny. Just hang on," I murmured, feeling the weight of parental desperation. Moving past the nap room, I approached the play area that led to the backyard. That's when I heard it, a soft whimpering that cut through the silence like a beacon. I rushed towards the sound, my heart pounding in my ears. Outside, the playground was deserted, swings moving slightly in the breeze as if ghosts of the children who played there lingered. And there, in the far corner, the little playhouse, Jinny's favorite spot. "Daddy!" The voice was faint, filled with relief and fear. I tore across the playground, my vision blurring with tears. Inside the playhouse, Jinny was huddled in a corner, her small body shaking. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and filled with something no child should ever experience, terror and relief tangled together. I scooped her up, feeling her tiny arms cling to me tightly. "We have to go, baby. It's going to be okay," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince more, her or me. As we stepped out of the daycare, the city noises reached us again, the distant moans of the undead a grim reminder that our ordeal wasn't over. Sam joined us, his face grim but relieved to see Jinny safe. "We need to find a safe place," he said, his voice firm despite the chaos around us. I nodded, holding Jinny close as we moved stealthily through the back alleys, avoiding the main streets overrun with the undead. The city was falling apart, its skyline a jagged silhouette against the setting sun. Our path was uncertain, every shadow a potential threat, but for now, we were together. We were alive? And as we disappeared into the growing darkness, I looked back once at the crumbling city, my determination renewed. No matter what it took, I would keep Jinny safe. This was not the end of our story, just a harrowing chapter in a world gone mad. What do you think happens next? Drop your ideas in the comments. I'll pick the coolest one to continue our story. I was halfway through my morning coffee when the radio crackled to life, tearing through the calm with urgent voices. Dropping the cup, I bolted toward the primate enclosure, my heart pounding as distant shouts and animal cries grew louder. As I rounded the corner, the scene unfolded like a nightmare. The once peaceful habitat was a whirlwind of chaos. Monkeys shrieked and leapt wildly, their eyes wild with what seemed like madness. The alpha chimpanzee, Oscar, was particularly violent, throwing himself against the enclosure's glass with terrifying force. "Eliza! Thank God, you're here." Jenna, one of the newer keepers, was backed against a wall, a tranquilizer gun shaking in her hands. What the hell happened? I shouted over the cacophony, grabbing an extra tranquilizer dart from the supply cart. No idea. They just started attacking each other out of nowhere. Jenna replied, her voice cracking with panic. Without thinking, I darted towards the enclosure, sliding the tranquilizer dart into my gun. Timing was everything. Oscar was fast and unpredictably dangerous now. He charged at the glass again, his teeth bared in a gruesome snarl. I took a deep breath, aimed, and fired. The dart hit him squarely in the neck. Seconds felt like hours as we waited for the sedative to take effect. Finally, Oscar's rampage slowed, and he staggered, collapsing onto the soft grass with a heavy thud. We need to check all the enclosures, now. I commanded, already moving towards the next crisis. The radio buzzed in my pocket, a frantic voice cutting through. Eliza, it's not just the primates. Something's wrong all over the zoo. The big cats. The transmission crackled and died before the sentence could be completed. I clenched the radio, feeling the weight of what was happening. Whatever this was, it was big, and it was beyond anything we were prepared for. As Jenna and I sprinted towards the big cat section, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. This wasn't just a bad day at the zoo, it was the beginning of something horrific. My breath formed clouds in the chilly morning air as I sprinted past the flamingo pond, now eerily silent. The usual chatter of the zoo was replaced by a menacing quiet, broken only by occasional, distant animal cries that made my skin crawl. Reaching the elephant enclosure, I was surprised to find the giant creatures calm, almost unnervingly so. Their intelligent eyes met mine with what I could only describe as an understanding, a stark contrast to the chaos erupting throughout the rest of the zoo. Eliza. A voice called out. I turned to see Martin, the elephant keeper, waving me over. His face was pale, his uniform torn in places, but he was unharmed. Martin, what's going on with them? I asked, gesturing to the elephants who stood protectively close to each other. They seem fine, not affected like the others. I don't understand it, he replied, scratching his head. It's the same with some of the big cats. Leo, the lion, he's just sitting there, I said, remembering the calm I saw in Leo's eyes earlier. A plan began to form in my mind. Martin, can you ride? He blinked, taken aback. Ride? As in? The elephants. We need to get to the aviary. I think we can use them to get through safely. Martin nodded slowly, his eyes widening as he grasped the severity of the situation. Let's do it. Minutes later, I was astride one of the elephants, feeling oddly regal and ridiculous atop the massive creature. Martin guided his elephant expertly as we began our trek towards the aviary. The zoo had transformed into a war zone. Paths I had walked 1,000 times seemed alien and dangerous. We passed the reptile house, hearing the sounds of something large crashing against the glass. As we neared the aviary, the sound of distress squawks and flapping wings grew louder. I spotted a group of zookeepers cornered by a swarm of what looked like crazed parrots and vultures. Hold on. I shouted to Martin, urging my elephant forward. The animals seemed to respect the elephants, keeping their distance as we plowed through the feathered frenzy. We reached the terrified keepers, who clambered up onto the safety of our giant escorts with relief. Among them was Sophie, a young intern who looked on the verge of tears. Eliza, I thought we were goners, she breathed out, clinging to the elephant's broad back. We're not clear yet. We need to get back to the main office and call for help, I said, turning the elephant around. Our return journey was tense, every rustle in the bushes making us jump. But the elephants remained calm, their presence a reassuring constant amid the madness. As the main office came into sight, a strange mix of relief and dread filled me. We were safe for now, but as the sound of something large moving in the distance reached my ears, I knew our battle was far from over. The elephants came to a reluctant halt, their large ears flapping with unease. Ahead, the narrow path to the main office was overrun by a snarling pack of hyenas, their eyes glowing unnaturally in the dim light of dawn. Their eerie cackles echoed off the zoo's walls, sending shivers down my spine. We can't go back, I whispered, my hand reaching for the tranquilizer gun strapped to my side. Beside me, Sophie gripped her own weapon, her face set in a determined, yet fearful expression. Martin, ever the voice of reason, hissed, Eliza, think this through. We need a plan. But time wasn't on our side. With a deep breath, I stepped down from the elephant, motioning for the others to stay back. I'll draw them off. Get to the office and call for help. Before Martin could argue, I darted into the bushes, my heart pounding as I circled around to approach the hyenas from behind. Their disturbing laughter grew louder as I neared, and in a swift motion, I raised my gun and fired 2 darts into the closest beasts. They collapsed, but the others turned, their bloodshot eyes locking onto me. The chase was brief and terrifying. I sprinted back towards the main office, the hyenas' growls close behind. Just as I felt their hot breath on my heels, a loud roar shattered the air. The hyenas scattered. To my amazement, Leo, the lion, stood between me and my pursuers, his massive body a protective barrier. Breathing heavily, I didn't stop to question his timely intervention. I bolted for the office, slamming the door shut behind me. The others were already there, barricading the entrances with anything they could find. We heard the hyenas, then the roar. What happened? Sophie asked, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and relief. Leo, I managed to say, leaning against the door as my breathing slowed. He saved me. The room fell silent as we all processed the surreal ally we had in Leo. But there was no time to dwell. The wall shuddered as something large slammed against the building, a reminder that safety was just an illusion. We need to figure out how this started, I said, my mind racing. Something caused this outbreak, and we're not getting out until we understand what. The others nodded, and we gathered around the old radio, desperate for any piece of information that could help us. Outside, the sounds of the zoo had changed. No longer were there just animal cries, there was something else, something more menacing. As I tuned the radio, trying to catch a clear signal, another heavy thud shook the door. We all froze, eyes locked on the trembling wood that was all that stood between us and the unknown horrors outside. The radio crackled to life, just as the door began to give way, a voice barely audible over the chaos. Unexplained behavior? Outbreak. Quarantine zone. The message was cut off as the door burst open, and we braced ourselves for what was coming. But what stormed in wasn't just a beast, it was the unknown, the unresolved, the unending fear that this night might never be over. And as we stood there, ready to fight, the story of our survival was just beginning. What do you think happens next? Drop your ideas in the comments. I'll pick the coolest one to continue our story. The grinding sound of the wind against the steel structure of the skyscraper was the first thing that woke me. It wasn't the gentle wake-up call of a typical morning, it was a harsh reminder that outside the walls of my makeshift sanctuary, the city was a graveyard of civilization. In the pre-dawn gloom, my apartment felt smaller, every shadow a lurking threat. I had survived here, atop the city's tallest building, for months, but my stomach groaned in protest, the food was nearly gone. Today was unavoidable. I needed to descend into the chaos, back to the ground where the dead ruled. Strapping a knife to my leg, I checked the makeshift spear next to the door. It was nothing more than a kitchen knife taped to a broom handle, but it had kept me alive. My backpack, once used for office documents, was now filled with empty water bottles and a few remaining cans of beans. Just as I reached for the door, a faint scratching echoed through the hallway. My heart skipped. Shadows seemed to move just at the edge of my vision, playing tricks on me, or maybe not. Could other survivors be near? My mind raced with paranoia. No time to hesitate, I reminded myself, pushing through the door into the stairwell. The descent was eerily quiet. Each floor whispered secrets of chaos left behind, doors ajar, walls bloodstained. By the time I reached the lobby, the silence was suffocating. I stepped out onto the street, and the real test began. A zombie lurched from the shadows between overturned cars. It moved with a jerky, unnatural motion, like a puppet with half its strings cut. I braced myself, gripping my spear. With a grunt, I thrust forward, catching the creature in the throat. It collapsed, gurgling and twitching. More groans filled the air, a chorus of the damned. I moved quickly, dodging another lunging figure, its hands clawing aimlessly. The city was alive, in its own grotesque way, with the walking dead. I ducked into an alley, catching my breath. The stink of decay was overwhelming. Above me, the skeletal remains of banners flapped in the wind, the celebrations of yesteryears turned to tatters. I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching me, tracking my every move. Was it just the dead? Or were the living just as dangerous now? As I ventured deeper into what used to be a bustling district, my old office loomed nearby, a shell of its former glory. Could there be anything left to salvage? It was a risk, but so was every breath I took in this forsaken city. Clutching my spear, I moved forward, determined to survive another day. The city was a maze of desolation and danger, each turn and alley a new test of survival. As I ventured deeper into the once bustling downtown, the air grew thick with the stench of decay and the moans of the undead echoed off the abandoned buildings, a haunting soundtrack to my grim task. My first stop was an old grocery store on the corner of 5th and Main. The glass doors were shattered, and dark stains smeared the entrance, a testament to the chaos that had occurred during the initial outbreak. Inside, the aisles were in disarray, products strewn across the floor, but there were valuable supplies still to be salvaged. While rummaging through a toppled shelf for canned food, a sudden noise, a soft scuffle, distinct from the omnipresent groans, caused me to freeze. It came from the back of the store. Weapon in hand, I crept towards the source, every sense alert. Peering around the corner, I caught a glimpse of a shadow darting away. Human or not, I couldn't tell. My heart pounded not just with fear but with the desperate hope of encountering another survivor. But my paranoia whispered cruel doubts. Was this person spying on me, leading me into a trap? The city had turned us all into either predators or prey, and trust was a luxury few could afford. Resolving to focus on my immediate needs, I gathered what supplies I could carry and exited the store, only to find a group of zombies shuffling toward the noise. I readied my spear and fought them off with desperate, calculated strikes. Each thud and squelch a grim reminder of what I had become. As I pushed forward, the evidence of other survivors grew. A campfire still smoldering, a barricade recently dismantled. Were they watching me now, assessing if I was friend or foe? Or perhaps they were just as scared and suspicious as I was. I reached what used to be a police station, hoping to find weapons or ammunition. Inside, the evidence of a hasty evacuation was everywhere, papers scattered, desks overturned. In the armory, I found a few boxes of ammunition and a decently intact handgun. As I loaded the gun, the faint murmur of voices reached my ears. I wasn't alone. Approaching the source, I found myself at the barred door leading to the basement. The voices were clearer now, a mix of fear and determination. They were planning, but for what? Rescue? Escape? Or something more sinister? I called out, "Hello? I'm not here to fight. I just need supplies." Silence followed, then a cautious reply. "Keep your distance, but we can talk." In the dim light of the basement, I saw them, 3 survivors, as ragged and wary as myself. We exchanged information hesitantly. They had seen others, they said, people who weren't just surviving but organizing. People who might be as dangerous as the zombies themselves. As our conversation unfolded, a scream pierced the air, close by. Without a word, we knew the truce was temporary. The dead were coming, attracted by our voices. Together, we fought them off, a frantic, messy battle that left us breathless and bonded in the briefest of alliances. As the last zombie fell, we parted ways, them deeper into the city, and I back to the skyscraper. But the encounter left me uneasy. Were these temporary allies or future enemies? The city held too many shadows, and trust was a gamble with deadly stakes. With my backpack heavy with supplies and my mind burdened with doubt, I began the perilous journey back to my skyscraper. The city around me felt more ominous than before, as if every shadow harbored a threat. The whisper of the wind seemed to carry voices, warnings. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, herded like prey. As I approached a familiar intersection, the groans of the undead grew louder, more fervent. They were close, too close for comfort. My pace quickened, every sense heightened to the stalking danger. That's when it happened, an orchestrated chaos, zombies spilling from side streets and alleys in a flood of decay and death. I was surrounded. The fight was brutal and desperate. I swung my spear with lethal precision, each strike a symphony of survival. Blood splattered, bones crunched, but the wave seemed endless. My breath grew ragged, my muscles screamed with exertion. It was a distraction, I knew it. This had the markings of the survivors group, using the dead as pawns in their deadly game. In a moment of sheer adrenaline, I spotted an opening, a narrow alley shielded by a toppled delivery truck. I made a break for it, sprinting with the last reserves of my strength. Behind me, the horde followed, drawn by the frenzy of movement. The alley led to an abandoned fire station, its red doors ajar. Inside, I slammed the door shut, barricading it with whatever I could find. My heart pounded against my rib cage like a frantic drum. I was safe, for the moment, but the illusion of security was thin. As I caught my breath, the realization dawned on me. The encounters, the fights, they were tests, assessments by the survivors group. Were they determining my worth? My threat? Or something more sinister? I couldn't stay. The skyscraper, my haven, was just a few blocks away. Gathering my resolve, I peeked through a crack in the door. The coast was clear, for now. I slipped out, blending into the broken skyline of the city, moving swiftly and silently. The streets were eerily quiet as I approached my building. The familiar graffiti on the walls seemed to mock my return, the living are more dangerous than the dead. How true that had proven to be. Reaching the building, I ascended the stairwell, each step a mix of relief and trepidation. As I unlocked the door to my refuge, the penthouse that had kept me alive, I paused. Was this truly safety, or just another cage? Inside, I secured the door and went to the window, looking out over the city. It was mine, in all its tragic glory. But as the sun set, casting long shadows over the streets, a small movement caught my eye. Someone was down there, watching. Or was it just my imagination? The end was neither a victory nor a defeat, it was a continuation of survival, a life lived on the razor's edge of trust and treachery. As I turned from the window, the weight of solitude pressed down on me. Was I truly alone? Or was the game just beginning? What do you think happens next? Drop your ideas in the comments. I'll pick the coolest one to continue our story.